Okay. Well, one of the team said I should wait another minute or two, so I will wait another minute or two. It's worth the wait. This lecture is definitely worth the wait. One, okay. Trying to keep track of things here. Whoop. Okay, I think we'll begin now. So, welcome to the Wedgwood International Seminar's Boredom Lecture. Thank you for joining us today for what I know is a very interesting lecture. Matthew Winterbottom is a great friend to the WIS. You might recall the fantastic lecture that he delivered on Christopher Dresser in February a year ago. I would like to remind all of you that this lecture will be recorded and will join each of our previous lectures on the WIS YouTube channel. The new and vastly improved WIS website is one way to access the YouTube channel. In the chat box, you will see we've listed the link to the website as well as the link to the YouTube channel where you can access all of those recorded lectures. I'd like to take a minute to recommend that you look at the WIS website periodically, not only for WIS news, but for all manner of Wedgwood information. When navigating the website, you will be able to learn how to become a member, about WIS events, how to support the organization, Wedgwood in the news, and how to contact us. Lastly, there is a section on resources listing both books and other ceramic organizations. The website also conveniently links to the WIS Facebook page, and you can easily access any of these on your smartwatch, or on your laptop, on your desktop. Anyway, if you're not already a WIS member, why not consider joining? Because in addition to the Zoom lectures, there are many benefits, such as the annual in-person seminar, which was held this year in Pasadena, California, and will be held next April in Chicago. Additional benefits include the scholarly proceedings, which is edited by Dr. Ann Forschler-Tarish, the Fellowship of Ceramic Enthusiasts from around the world at this in-person seminar, and the new WIS newsletter. You'll hear more about the newsletter at the end of the meeting. You will find a WIS membership application on the website. And again, Ann will talk to you at the end of the meeting about the Chicago seminar in April of 2025. A few quick words on how today's meeting will be conducted. Ann will be the moderator. She will introduce our speaker, Matthew Winterbottom. The lecture will be followed by a question and answer session. So please, throughout the lecture, remember to type your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So I will now like to turn the meeting over to Ann, but just keep in mind, please stay on after the Q&A to learn a few additional WIS information pieces. So Ann, it's all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. Excuse me. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for joining us this Friday afternoon, at least over here on the side of the pond. Today we're going to hear from Matthew Winterbottom, who, as Lorraine said, has given us an excellent lecture already on Christopher Dresser. Matthew, if you don't know him, he's the curator of decorative arts and sculpture at the Ashmolean Museum, which is at Oxford. But he has a long and illustrious career in the field. He's interested in a wide range of decorative arts, European, from the late medieval period through into the 20th century, and he's very well versed in a wide variety of materials. He started his career at the Victoria and Albert Museum, then went on to work for the Royal Collection, where he co-curated several exhibitions in the decorative arts at the Queen's Gallery at Buckingham Palace. And he was then curator of decorative arts at the Holborn Museum in Bath, where he did a major reinstallation and redevelopment of the collection there. Today, Matthew is going to talk to us about a little-known collection that is housed at Somerville College in Oxford that I don't think sees the light of day very often and probably doesn't get a lot of visitors, especially us Wedgwoodians from the States here that make it, if we even have the opportunity to make it to Oxford at any point. So we're excited to hear from Matthew about this collection. And as Lorraine said, please ask questions in the chat. And at the end of the lecture, we'll have the opportunity to hear from Matthew in response to some of those questions. So I will turn things over to Matthew now. Thank you so much for joining us, Matthew, and ready to go.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Lorraine and Anne, for inviting me back. I'm very honoured to come back for a second, meeting a very different talk this time. So let me just share my screen. Where's it gone? Hang on a minute. Window. Sorry, I'm just trying to find my screen's disappeared. Sorry, I do apologise about this. We just tested this. Sorry about this. I can't find my... Let me try this again. Sorry about this. Ah, there we are. Phew. To go back to here, we've got some of the loan pieces we have on display in the galleries. As you can see, I mean, quite nice pieces, some early Wedgwood and Bentley pieces, and we actually are very lucky to have on long-term loan 3 wonderful creamware plates from the frog service that was made for Catherine the Great. So, and we also have a collection of wonderful plaques and jewellery, which are split between my collection and the coin room collections here in Oxford. But I also thought you might like to see this collection of wonderful drawings that we have and etchings in the collection, which show the old Wedgwood Etruria factory in the 1940s and early 1950s, which are in our print room collection here. These are all by Leonard Griffith Brammer, who was born in 1986 in Burslem in Stoke-on-Trent, and they just show the early factory before, well, actually just after the factory, of course, had moved in 1940 across to Burslem. But these are rather wonderful to just give you an idea of what we do have in the Ashmolean collection here. So here we have this one, which shows the ovens, kilns and old decorating shops at Wedgwood, and then this one shows where are we? The workshops and large mooring post, as you can sort of see here. And then this one, we also have a wonderful collection of Stoke in general. This shows Burslem on the hill there with the wonderful smoky chimneys. So they're very, very evocative. We are also very lucky to actually have some of the original drawings for these as well, for these etchings. And this again shows Burslem. And this is one of the drawings that he then used to work up into his etchings. Anyway, moving on from the Ashmolean Museum, this is an aerial view of Oxford here. Those of you that don't know Oxford, I just thought it would be helpful to give you a kind of idea of Oxford and what Oxford colleges are. The University of Oxford and Cambridge are made up of constituent colleges, and there are nearly 40 in Oxford. And these colleges are peppered throughout the city. So the city is very much part of the university. And these quads that you can still see here, this view of central Oxford, this is the Sheldonian Theatre sort of here, and the Radcliffe Camera, which is a library in the centre here. These quads, these rectangular buildings with green in the middle, are various different colleges. This is All Souls College here. This is Brasenose. We've got Hertford College, Balliol College, St John's College, and these are very much in the heart of the medieval city. And many of these colleges were founded in the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. Next to them here, we've got the famous Bodleian Library with the green roof in the centre here. So that gives you a sort of idea. I'm talking to you from just over here. I think you can see my cursor, I hope. In the background there, that's where the Ashmolean Museum is. And Somerville College, which I'll be talking about later, is further north. This is the north of the city. And these, of course, the later colleges, the colleges that were often built for women in the late 19th and early 20th century, were built in the outskirts of Oxford. So they tend to be out of the medieval centre of the city. But very much the unique character of Oxford is made up of all these different individual colleges and their own individual sort of collections and character. Now, many of the colleges have really important collections, but not many of them have important collections of ceramics. Ceramics isn't really something that's loomed large, I think, in Oxford college life. Silver is something that did and still does, in fact, and this is a wonderful 1950s view of the silver audit at Pembroke College in 1956. And this is when every year the silver butlers would take out all the historic silver and put it onto the table, and it will be checked off against an inventory. And all the colleges used to do this. They don't do it quite so frequently as they used to, but they still do. And as you can see, there's a wonderful range of 17th, 18th, 19th century silver. And in fact, some of the colleges have silver going right back to the 14th, 15th centuries. So really very important. Colleges are also, this is also Pembroke College here. You can sort of see the Great Hall here. They have wonderful collections of paintings. Many of them are historic portraits, but also wonderful collections, of paintings in addition to portraits as well, including, depending on what various alumni would decide to leave or give to the college over the hundreds of years that they've been sort of in existence. This next slide here shows the wonderful early Iznik and Persian ceramics that are in Magdalen College here in Oxford, which were given in the 1950s, for example. There are several dozen pieces of these wonderful pieces which are on display in the president's lodgings there. So they're often given as kind of pieces that will embellish the kind of often semi-private quarters of the colleges. And on the left there, there's a wonderful tapestry. This is the tapestry that was given to the president of Magdalen College in 1501 when he helped negotiate the marriage of Henry VIII's brother, Prince Arthur, to Catherine of Aragon. And he actually went out to Spain to help negotiate the marriage. And this tapestry, which shows that marriage, it still hangs in the president's lodgings just around the corner from where these wonderful ceramics are. So, there's this wonderful sort of history within the different colleges. Now, moving on to Somerville College. Somerville College is a much more recent college and slightly different in character, I would say. This is the entrance to Somerville College. You can see it's actually not the kind of very grand kind of entrance that you might expect from an Oxford college. And this is partly to do with the foundation of the college and why it was founded and who it was founded for. Here we have an aerial view. This is the little entrance at the beginning here, and you can see it's composed actually behind that rather modest kind of arts and crafts early 20th century sort of entrance. You can see actually the college is quite large. In fact, it has one of the largest grass quads in Oxford, and you can sort of see how there's a series of ramshackle rooms, different periods of architectural buildings have been built onto the college over the past 150 years that it's been in existence. Now, the reason I'm talking to you about this college is because as a curator here at the museum, we often get phone calls from librarians or from the curators of the different college collections asking for our opinion about their collections. And about probably 10 years ago now, I got a phone call from the then librarian at the college here in Somerville saying they had this collection of Wedgwood ware and would I be interested to go and see it and maybe advise on it. And so I, of course, jumped at the chance. This is a collection that nobody really knew anything about. So I decided to bring Colin Wyman with me, who is a fellow member of the Oxford Ceramics Group here in Oxford, and I shall talk a little bit about that shortly, because he has written quite a lot about Wedgwood and his competitors, but also Cheetham and Woolley. Many of you may know this excellent book by Colin, which he published some years ago about Cheetham and Woolley. So I took Colin with me, and we went to look at this extraordinary collection, and we were taken to the new council room, this rather semi-private room. It's a room that's used for meetings, which was built in the 1930s, painted this rather nice kind of O'Donnell green, and around the walls was a series of 3 cases. You can sort of see one of them here, filled with this collection of about 50 pieces of Wedgwood, or what we thought was Wedgwood at the time. And so we spent our time looking through that collection and realized it was quite an interesting and unusual collection, and one, as I say, that previously hadn't really been known, because these spaces were used primarily by members of the college. Not many people outside of the college knew about this collection, and that's often the case for the Oxford colleges. You find these collections are sometimes sort of hidden away, and even I today I'm still finding out about extraordinary objects that are sprinkled across the colleges. This is a case showing one of the displays. You can sort of see the kinds of objects that are sort of in this collection, and I'll be talking about a selection of them shortly. So the new council room, as you can see, this is a photograph taken in 1932, just after it had been built. And it was a new room built in the early 1930s in a kind of classical Georgian revival style. You can sort of see the whole room is decorated in a kind of faux Georgian style, which was fashionable at that time. The furniture, again, is in a kind of faux Regency sort of revival style. Notice, actually, on the 18th century style chimney piece, there are 2 basaltware vases, and these predate the Cochrane collection. These seem to have been probably, I think, the reason why the collection then came shortly, a few years later, because they'd already decorated the room with some pieces of 18th century Wedgwood black basaltware. So what we did, Colin and I looked at the collection, got rather interested in it, and we decided to bring a group with us, the Oxford Ceramics Group. This is a group of kind of interested collectors, curators, and other people in Oxford and elsewhere, beyond actually, and beyond around the country, who are interested in ceramics, primarily Western ceramics. And we organise visits, and we have an excellent newsletter, for example, and do many kind of visits in the kind of Oxford area. And we brought the group of about 20 people to the college to have a look at this wonderful collection. And then Colin very helpfully kind of published a very short account of our visit, and this is what you see on your screen now, back in 2019, so just before lockdown, and he then wrote this up. So again, our newsletters are kind of available, so if any of you are interested, do get in touch. It's an excellent newsletter. Anyway, moving on to let me just go through my notes. To Somerville College. This is the first quad you find yourself in when you go through that rather wonderful, slightly hobbity sort of doorway into this lovely kind of Cotswold stone quadrangle here. And Somerville College was actually founded here, I think you've got it here, was actually founded in 1879, and it's one of the first 2 colleges for women founded in Oxford, both in that year. And this actually was important as the non-denominational college. So it didn't have a strong Church of England connection, which Lady Margaret Hall, which was the other college founded in the same year, did. And actually, it was always a very liberal, a very kind of forward-looking college, which when I tell you a little bit more about the founder, about the donor of this collection, you might make a bit more sense. And it's actually named after this lady here. She was Mary Somerville, who was an important 19th century scientist, and geographer and mathematician, and she's very, very interesting. She died in 1873. She was born in 1870, and it was decided to name the college after this great pioneering, very sort of erudite woman, who in fact the term scientist, the kind of non-gendered term scientist, was used for the first time in the 1830s. So it's a very interesting idea. And the college, only, as I said, they were founded in 1879. They didn't actually become part of the University of Oxford until 1920, and that's because women were not allowed to take a degree until then. So although the college was in existence from 1879, it was only officially absorbed into the university in 1920. So when women were allowed to take a degree. And the college was famous for being very forward-looking. In fact, one of the very few colleges where students are encouraged to walk on the grass. So here we have students sitting on the grass in the kind of Edwardian period. And there are no gowns worn in the hall as well. So no formal attire, which is often something that you associate with many of the other colleges. So it has this very liberal, kind of relaxed attitude. It was also the college that stopped locking its gates late in the evening from the early 1960s, so students could go out late at night. So this was, again, another kind of pioneering attitude towards the college. And it went co-ed. It started letting in men and women back in the 1990s. And famous alumni include Vera Brittain on the left there, Iris Murdoch at the top, Dorothy L. Sayers at the bottom, and Indira Gandhi. So, you know, very famous, very sort of leading sort of women. And probably the most famous of all the alumni is Margaret Thatcher, Margaret Roberts, as she then was, and she actually graduated in chemistry from the college in 1947, and here she is on the left as a young chemist at Oxford. And then on the right, here she is at Somerville College with this rather terrifying bust by Oscar Niemann, made in 1977. She's unveiling the bust, or she's sort of admiring the bust at the college. And here she is, and here is the bust. He was a kind of local Oxford sculptor. This is made of terracotta, and slightly terrifying, I have to say. But actually, I show it because actually in the room where all the Cochrane collection is displayed, she looms large over the top. So she's looking over when you're looking at this wonderful sort of collection of Wedgwood. So, who gave it? And here she is. This is Effie Rosemary Cochrane, aged 18 in 1926. She was born in 1908, and her first name was Euphemia. And in fact, for those of you that are coming from listening in from North America, she was actually half American, and she spent a lot of her time in America. And she was in fact born in Saratoga Springs. She was born there in 1908, and her mother was American, her father was English. And she was the donor in 1939 that gave this collection. But the collection had belonged to her father, had been put together by her father, and he had died slightly earlier in 1936. And she gave the collection, I think, probably because she'd seen this room and she'd seen that it would look rather nice. She also gave money to put in new cases. So the room, as I say, this is the room in 1933, and you can see under the windows there are these gaps here. These were then taken out, and glazed cases were put in specifically to show this collection, and it's been there ever since in this room. As Anne was saying, not many people see it, only people that come for meetings. And in fact, sometimes I think those cases are kind of covered over, so you can't even see the collection. So it is a slightly underappreciated collection, I think I would say, in terms of the wider community, although I know members of the college really appreciate it and really enjoy it. Now, Cochrane famously, became more famous later on, actually, for buying an entire village. She bought the village of Gitting Power in the Cotswolds, and this is it on the right. And on the left, you'll see this rather wonderful plaque there, which talks about the Lord of the Manor of Gitting Power. But you'll notice, you'll see the plaque actually describes somebody called Ellis Raymond Cochrane. And this is the same person. And this is one part of the extraordinary story of the donor of this collection, is that she was actually born intersex in 1908. And the decision was made by her parents to raise her as a young woman. And she was born into this very wealthy kind of upper class family. But after her father died in 1936, she decided this was the wrong decision. And from 1945, she started living as a man. And in the late 1940s, had gender reassignment surgery and actually became a man and changed her name to Ellis Raymond Cochrane and was treated as a man from there on. So nothing really is very new, and it's very much she was accepted, I think, by the college in this very liberal kind of atmosphere that she had been nurtured. So here she is. Here is Raymond on the left-hand side in the 1980s. And in fact, he married a famous actress called Sally Latimer in the 1960s, and they sort of lived together until Sally's death in the 1980s, in 1982. And Raymond continued living until 1998. He lived to be just 1 month or a few weeks just after his 90th birthday. So a very long and very full and active life. And in fact, he published a book on the milch cow, which is a slightly odd title, but all about I was very, very interested in the kind of rural economy and rural life in England. This is why he bought the estate in the Cotswolds, to save it, and was very, very key in sort of restoration and in regenerating rural economy in the post-war period. So he gave away much of his estate, as I say, to save it from death duties in his life. Anyway, moving on, as I said, the collection was not put together by Raymond or Effie. It was actually put together by his father, who was James Richmond Inglis Cochrane, who was born in 1857 in Scotland. And this is rather a wonderful view of the 1880s of him as a kind of dapper young man. And this is taken from this rather wonderful photograph, which shows his father there, John Richard Cochrane, who was born in 1827 and lived until 1921, who was a wealthy muslin manufacturer. And this is him and his wife and their daughters and their son at the Caldergan House in Blantyre, which is kind of south of Glasgow. So this is and this, when I show you the house, this is the house that John bought in the 1870s, which is where James Richmond, I think he seemed to have been called Richmond most of the time rather than using his first name James, who was the father of Raymond, spent much of his formative years. And you can see it has this rather wonderful, very austere Scottish late 18th century appearance, and I think that might have informed his taste for this kind of neoclassical Wedgwood, which he subsequently went on to collect. The house was originally built in 1795, but then was extended and the sides in the 19th century, as you can see there. It's now a kind of nursing home, but it's rather a handsome Scottish house. And just for you to explain where it is, this is Glasgow on the left, and we've got Edinburgh on the right. And Blantyre is just to the south of Glasgow there on the screen there. Now, I said there was a kind of American connection. What's interesting is that Richmond travels to America and actually marries Effie Rose Andrews in Saratoga Springs in 1891. And this is Saratoga Springs. It was a fashionable kind of spa town. I mean, the reason I'm telling you is you may know more about some of the people I sort of introduce, may be able to flesh out this story about the kind of taste and the collecting of this couple. So this is a view of it in the 1880s. And here we have another view here showing one of the kind of springs where the people, I think fashionable people in the 1880s are kind of taking the waters in this kind of fashionable New York State spa town. I haven't managed to find an image of Effie Rose Andrews, but actually there are images of her father and her mother, who again were quite well known. Her father, as we go here, was Captain James Madison Andrews, who was born in 1843 and died in 1923, and he was a kind of hero of the Civil War. And he lived in 48 West 57th Street in New York and Saratoga Springs in New York. So he had two residences. And then her mother here was Effie, so they were all called Effie or Euphemia Cochrane Andrews. So Cochrane was her maiden name, Cochrane without an E, so different to the other Cochrane, but I think must have been related. And her father was certainly Scottish, and I think that's probably how the connection between the families happened, because of this Scottish connection. Her father had moved over from Scotland in the early 19th century. And she became a very important Christian Science practitioner. So she is, again, somebody that's quite well known, and there are various archives of her work in America. So Effie and James Richmond Inglis move eventually to Edinburgh in the early 20th century. There's lots of going backwards and forwards between Britain and North America. So passenger lists for the various shipping companies show the family moving backwards and forwards, but eventually they settle in 26 Abercrombie Place in the lovely, very elegant new town of Edinburgh, and it's again a very Georgian part of the city. And they slowly fill the house, really from the early 20th century, with their collection of ceramics and many other things as well, as far as I can tell. I should say this is very much a work in progress. There's much more work, I think, to be done on this collection, on these collectors, and on the individual objects as well. So this is very much an introduction. I'm sort of introducing the collection to you, but there's much more work, I think, to take forward on it. And Effie, our Effie, who became Raymond, was born here in moved here, I say, when she was a young girl at the beginning of the 20th century, but spent her time between North America and Edinburgh. And the sort of things that were in the house, not just the Wedgwood. This is when Raymond died, just before he died in 1998. He made over a series of gifts to various museums, particularly in Scotland, of his father's collection. So this is way after the Wedgwood, which was given in 1939. All the remainder of the collection seems to have been given over between 1995 and 1997, so just before Raymond passed away. So he was clearly thinking about dispersing his father's collection, all given in his father's name. And this is the sort of ceramics that he was sort of giving away, just to give you an idea of the kinds of objects, so lots of kind of continental and British 18th century ceramics. And this is split across different museums around the country. All these pieces are in the National Museums of Scotland. In addition, other things were given. So a large collection of mainly Italian and French, and also some East Asian fans, even kind of Mughal drawings, this rather extraordinary drawing of a camel. So clearly the interior at Abercrombie Place in Edinburgh was rich and full of the most wonderful objects, and you've got to imagine these kind of things sprinkled with the Wedgwood that we're going to be seeing later on, or shortly, should I say. So moving to the actual collection that was given to in 1939 from her father's collection. It consists of about 50 pieces, and it's a very uneven collection. I do apologize about the photographs. You'll see some of them are rather grainy. This is because I've taken these ones from the inventory that was so that none of the pieces have been properly or professionally photographed yet. I say the entire collection has yet to be properly published and sort of dispersed, so there's more work to be done on it. But I do have some better photographs later on. But just to give you an idea of an overview of the collection, this gives you this is all the Wedgwood pieces here, and you can see some of the pieces are extremely fine and important, including the first edition porcelain vase there, which I'll come on to. And then some of the pieces are much more generic, and in fact some of them, most are of the late 18th century. But one or two of the later 19th century have snuck in. I suspect they were acquired as 18th century, but actually have since been reattributed as being later sort of copies. But you can see it kind of really varies in quality and varies in importance. So we've got quite a lot of jasperware primarily, and then some black basalts. Again, all this is Wedgwood, marked Wedgwood pieces. Not a huge collection. And again, very sort of slightly uneven in terms of what it has and what it shows. Here we have Aristophanes and Cicero busts here, some rather wonderful vases, of which I'll talk more about some of the key pieces on the screen here. And we even have one pebbleware. So nearly all the collection, there's very little earthenware in the collection, but we do have this kind of pebbleware vase here on the bottom right-hand side. That's the only one. Not in great condition, missing its lid. In fact, many of the pieces are missing their lids. But within this collection, there are some really important and fine things, and I'll come on to them shortly. But for me and Colin, when we came to visit the collection, what really struck us were the competitors. Actually, not so much necessarily the Wedgwood pieces, but the pieces that were made by Wedgwood competitors, because it was quite a nice and unusual group of pieces by other makers. Here we have a nice group of 5 pieces by Turner and Co. and again, I'll talk a bit more about them later on as we sort of come into the details. And then we have pieces here. Sorry, let me just go on. We have, sorry, I've lost my place. I do apologise. Yes, here we go. Sorry. We have a piece by James Neal of 1780. We have a William Adams jug there. We have a vase by T and J Hollins and an Elijah Meyer teapot. So, interesting pieces that, show what other makers were doing at the time in sort of imitating or copying or competing with Wedgwood. And I think that's what really makes this collection particularly interesting. But to go back to the actual Wedgwood pieces, you'll see here actually one of the key pieces in the entire collection is this first edition vase. It is very rare and very special. Is unquestionably probably the most important piece in the entire collection. Here it is displayed in its case. You can sort of see in the centre here. And as you all know, Wedgwood Oven Book lists 43 of these first edition vases, 5 between 1791, 1796, of which 30 are thought to have been okay. And as you all, again, I shan't go into the whole history of these vases, but you can sort of see it copies the ancient cameo glass vase that was in the British Museum. And that, in fact, which is now in the British Museum, should I say, which the Duke of Portland lent to Wedgwood to sort of copy. So in 1789, Wedgwood achieved his first perfect sort of copy of the vase in black basalt, or in a sort of, not in basalt, sorry, in a jasper body, which kind of imitates the blue-black sort of glass of the original ancient Roman vase. And then he uses slips to get this kind of translucent effect of cameo cutting on the surface here. Probably one of my favorite pieces in the collection is this wonderful little cabinet cup. He lists cabinet cups in his catalogue of 1779, and it may be that his teawares like this were really for display only. We're not really sure. Certainly he liked to use the basalt body, but he felt that the blackness of the body would actually enhance the pale colour of women's hands, the kind of whiteness of women's hands. It would actually make them quite popular for use if they were being used for drinking tea out of. Although I think it would have been would not have been a particularly pleasant experience drinking tea out of this kind of matte sort of surface. But this one has his so-called encaustic decoration, which is of course named after the ancient technique of kind of painting on wood using pigments in wax, but actually here he's using coloured slips and oxides to recreate this kind of ancient Greek surface decoration on the basalt body. But it's a particularly beautiful example, I would say. And now one of the earliest pieces, in fact, that we were looking at is this one. This is a Wedgwood and Bentley piece with the lowercase mark here on the right-hand side. And there's a front view and a back view in black basalt, made around about 1770, 1775, kind of the middle years of his partnership with Bentley. And I just show on the right here, this is an example from the Victoria and Albert Museum showing the same scene, this wonderful view of the marriage of Cupid and Psyche, which is repeated on the side here, which is quite hard to see in this photograph. So I'm including it here. And again, probably little plaque was made in the late 1770s, but rather a beautiful piece, an early piece. And I say probably about 5 or 6 pieces in the collection have the Wedgwood and Bentley mark, so quite nice sort of early examples. Another fine example is this wonderful vase here in the centre, flanked by these 2 3-colour vases here on the right-hand side, which are probably later. Again, these are thought to be later 19th century, but the one in the centre is certainly a late 18th century example. And then the teapot on the bottom right is also in the collection. Now, the one in the which has the same view, and it shows a young woman. These are these wonderful scenes done by Lady Templetown of domestic employment, and it's a young woman teaching her child to sew, as you can sort of see here. The other side of this vase in the centre shows Poor Maria, and I show a little plaque from the V&A showing the scene of Poor Maria, which is on the back side of the vase there, which again is a motif that you'll see quite a lot of. This comes from the famous Stern book, where to find it, Paul Maria, which was published in 1768, A Sentimental Journey Through France and Italy, and it tells the story of young Maria, who is in mourning for her late husband, and she meets the protagonist of the book sitting under a poplar tree. Here she is sitting under the poplar tree with her faithful dog Silvio, mourning the death of her late husband. And this was an incredibly popular motif made by Wedgwood and then modelled by Francis Hackwood in the 1780s and turned into sprigs, which were then used by Wedgwood and by nearly all the other manufacturers that we will see as we go through the collection here. And here's a nicer view of the little teapot here. Again, another kind of late 18th century teapot with this lovely sort of sprigging on it. But moving away from Wedgwood, I wanted to really just move to this wonderful group. And again, we have better photographs coming, so don't worry too much about these ones here, which are by John Turner the Elder, or Turner and Co. Because actually the quality of these pieces is absolutely superb. And I think it shows you how Turner really achieved a kind of almost exactly the same level of quality and finish that Wedgwood did, rather than calling him imitators, and in fact created new and exciting designs as well as quite close kind of imitations of some of Wedgwood's wares here. So I mean, John Turner, he was actually christened in Shropshire and moved to Staffordshire, where he was apprenticed in the 1750s, started his own factory in the late 50s, and then relocated to Lane End, which is now part of Longton in Stoke-on-Trent, and where he made some extraordinary pieces, in a wide variety of bodies, including basalts, cane wares, cream wares, and of course the wonderful jasper wares here as well. He was also employed by the Prince of Wales, and so he was able to use the Prince of Wales feather sometimes on his mark on some of his pieces. So he's a very important and interesting sort of maker. And what's interesting is, in fact, he goes bankrupt in 1806, so none of these pieces bearing the Turner and Co. mark. He was joined by his children, his two sons, in the 1780s, can post-date 1706. And then Richard Woolley of Cheetham and Woolley, of the feldspatic stoneware that Colin wrote about, which I told you about, took over that factory, the Turner factory, in 1806 until he went bankrupt in 1814. So the factory continued for a little bit. So there is a sort of connection there. So you can sort of see some of the wonderful pieces here, and moving to this lovely inkstand, again made around about 1800. Sorry, not 1800, 1780, something like that. It's actually a very close copy of a Wedgwood example. So here we have a Wedgwood example here, which was first made in 1780, and you can see how the Turner copy is almost an exact copy, although actually I would argue some of the detail here on the sides is probably finer or as fine as that on the Wedgwood version. It's actually more detailed here. So it shows you that the company was not only just making kind of close copies, but also doing quite individual, unique pieces as well. We also have, marked by Turner, a mug. This is the mug here. We haven't got a very good photograph of it, but I do have a V&A example here, which is exactly the same, uses exactly the same sprigging, and though the sprigging has been sort of moved slightly around the side of the mug, you can sort of see again it has Paul Maria. So this is the Wedgwood sprig, which Turner are then reusing slightly different. These are two Wedgwood pieces here at the top, which are in the V&A, and then this is the mug here. You can sort of see how the sprig is almost identical. There are slight changes here, but it is very, very similar. And then similarly, this rather wonderful Cupid and Lion, which is again a motif that appears on Wedgwood and elsewhere as well. And then the other Turner, we have a bulb pot here. This is the other Turner piece, which shows this rather wonderful scene, which I think is probably the abduction of Hebe here. And here we have another Turner piece, which is in the V&A, showing a kind of detail, this figure here with this wonderful sort of small putto on the back of a eagle here, but really showing the kind of quality of the work. But probably the highlight of the entire Turner collection is this trio, this garniture of 3 vases. And again, I have better images coming up. A large central vase and 2 smaller vases here by Turner, all marked by Turner, made between about 1803 and 1806. And if I move on to the next slide, you can see this is our piece in the top left-hand side. The next one along is an identical version, which is in the British Museum, with exactly the same sort of scene here. This shows Diana in her car being pulled by a pair of deer here on this cloud. So it's exactly the same as the one that's in the Somerville collection. And then the one on the right, which is a slightly sharper photograph, which I thought I'd include as well, is in the Victoria and Albert Museum, which really shows you the superb quality and the superb kind of modeling and sharpness and crispness of the decoration on these pieces. And nearly all of them, as you can see, are on these wonderful polished basalt bases, and often the marks are on the bases as well, not just on the vases. So and I really just include this Wedgwood little plaque here, which shows Aurora, which I think possibly is possibly the inspiration for the Diana in her car here. You can sort of see there's quite a close similarity between the composition of the two there. And then this is a detail of one of the smaller vases, as you can sort of see here, that shows the Christmas and these rather unusual, very tightly sort of coiled sort of handles that you sort of have here. And then the one on the right is the pair to it. It's not such a great photograph. I do apologize about that, but again, it just gives you an idea of just how beautiful and how high quality these pieces by Turner are. If you bear these two in mind, we come on to the next vase here. There are two coloured vases which are almost identical in form and decoration to the Turner pair, but unusually underneath the basalt base they had the mark of T.J. Hollins, Thomas and John Hollins of Hanley. Very rare mark, very unusual mark, and they're so close you sort of think, but they're obviously in a different colorway. The handles, which look rather odd, are actually silver. The vases have both been broken at some point, excuse me, and the handles have been replaced with silver filigree, which has since blackened. It hasn't been cleaned for a long time, so they look rather odd. It's a very strange sort of repair, but I think quite an old repair, probably a 19th century repair. But you can sort of see if we move on to the if I sort of, sorry, move on to the next slide, you can sort of see on the left is a Turner example, and on the right is this Turner example is on the left is actually in the British Museum. As you can sort of see, it's got this, it's identical to our one on the right hand side, which is marked by Hollins. And but when you start comparing them, when you start looking more closely, you'll see there are differences. Because I was thinking, well, possibly the mark is underneath the basalt base. Maybe it's just the basalt base that was made by Hollins. Maybe the actual body was made by, was made by, sorry, Turner and Co. Sorry, but the more I looked into it, the more I think it is Hollins. But you can sort of see the decoration around here is slightly different form. The sprigging around here is different, but generally they clearly have been modelled on this, and they've used the same pattern here as well. This is the other vase here, and you can sort of see how the Turner this Turner bulb pot here and this Turner plaque here is exactly the same as the pattern on here, which again shows this abduction, I think, of Hebe. So clearly Hollins were copying or were working quite closely on with Turner. But what convinced me that maybe that Turner hadn't made these two vases, because I was thinking, well, maybe it is just the basis, was this one piece which is in the V&A. And this is actually a little white jasperware bowl, which is in the same sort of colorway as the vases that are in the Somerville collection. And you can sort of, it's the one piece by Holland in the Victorian Albert Museum which appears on their catalogue. So it's again very, very rare. It is marked by T&J Holland. And if you look at it, you can sort of see how it does copy actually exactly elements from Turner. So this little jug here on the right hand side has the same sprigging around the rim here as you have here, exactly the same sort of decoration. And then this little scent bottle by Turner here is also copying this central figure here. But also this Wedgwood vase here, which is in the Victorian Albert Museum, is also, sorry, in the British Museum, is also got the same figures here again, I think after Lady Templetown on the front here. So clearly they're also copying each other. So I do think that these two vases, if we go back to here, these two vases are by T&J Holland, and they're incredibly rare, possibly the most interesting pieces, I think, in the entire collection in terms of rarity and unusualness, and in this very unusual sort of colorway that you sort of have. Now, the next kind of interesting piece that we have in the collection is this one. Let me just move. And it was one of the earliest pieces. This is by James Neal. It's got this very unusual mark underneath it, the circular mark here, which says J. Neal Hanley. A very rare impress mark underneath the base, and it dates from around, well, according to this website, between 1776 1778, so kind of mid 1770s. And then Neal is a very interesting manufacturer. He was one of the first to start making black stonewares in imitation of Wedgwood's basalt ware, and he was in partnership with Humphrey Palmer. In fact, Palmer started, and then Neal joined him in the late 1760s. And of course, Palmer famously employs John Voyes, who copies and sort of steals various designs from Wedgwood, and is taken to court by Wedgwood. And so I'm wondering if, in fact, Voyes was involved with this rather wonderful design. So this is the one on the left is the one that's in the Somerville collection, and you can see this wonderfully sort of beautiful detail decoration on it. The one on the right is in the V&A, which is lacking its lid. It's unmarked. So the V&A, the one in Somerville is marked. The one on the V&A is not marked, but is attributed to either Palmer or Neal. And of course, I think the mark on our piece here confirms that attribution. But the image on the right really shows you just how sharp and beautifully sort of detailed this decoration is on this basalt ware of this kind of mid 1770s. Also in the collection is this lovely jug on the left hand side, marked Adams. Let me just get my sort of this was William Adams and Sons. This dates from around about 1800, and it has this very, very distinct, very intense sort of blue jasper body, which is very distinctive of the Adams factory. And then Adams often used Sheffield plate mounts. So the lid here for this beer jug is made of old Sheffield plate, so it's kind of copper and silver combined together, which kind of imitates silver. But very nice, very sort of handsome sort of piece, but the only example by Adams in the collection. I suspect when these pieces were being put together, probably in the early 20th century, these non-Wedgwood pieces were seen as lesser and maybe less interesting, and they were acquired at the same time. But of course, they've become much more interesting to us over time. And on the right-hand side, we have, and I should say that that the Adams family have a very long and illustrious history of potting in Stoke-on-Trent, going back centuries. And but the first mention, I think, of is the start for this particular company is 1769, and it continued right through into the 1960s, and it did eventually merge with Wedgwood until eventually, I think, going out of business in the 1990s. And on the right hand side, we have a wonderful sort of jug here in the V&A, which again has wonderful old Sheffield plate mounts with the same figures, these kind of classical figures around the edges, or sacrificing to the various gods that you sort of see, with the same sprigging, and in fact the same sprigging around the rim here to the one on the Turner and the Hollins pieces. So you can sort of see how all the different factories are sort of copying exactly the same sprigs and same motifs. And then the final piece in the kind of collection is this one, which I wanted to talk about, which is by another maker, Elijah Meyer. And this is quite typical of the kind of black basalt ware for which he was quite well known at the time, and a number of these kind of teapots and teawares are sort of known by Meyer. And this one probably dates from around about 1800. Really quite nice quality, again with the same sprigs, the same sprigging patterns that we've seen on some of the others, and the same sort of finials that you get on Wedgwood pieces here. And you know, again, Meyer was producing quite a large range of goods, not just basalt wares, but pieces in creamware and other as well. But his basalt ware was particularly famous and particularly well thought of at the time. And here is a little impressed mark that we sort of have here. Here are some other pieces in the V&A and British Museum collections, which show the kind of range that Meyer was doing. Here we have a caneware teapot of exactly the same model as the teapot in the Somerville collection. Then we have more caneware on the right with kind of polychrome decoration, and then creamware underneath here, a large creamware. So you can sort of see how how Meyer was exactly copying the sort of output of the Wedgwood factory. And then here we have more pieces in the British Museum, sorry, in the V&A, I do apologise, which show the same sprigging. And in fact, the sucrier and the milk jug here, little cream jug, I think of the same pattern as the teapot in our collection, whereas the teapot they're shown with at the V&A has a slightly different engine turns kind of base. But this is very typical of these very fine black basalt wares that Meyer was producing around about 1800. And then finally, just to show you how the different kind of companies were copying each other and copying each other's sprigging. And here we have our teapot in the top left. Here's the mug that we have, which is by Turner, so the Meyer teapot. And then we have the Turner little mug below with exactly the same child and lion below. And then on the right, we have a British Museum teapot by Meyer again, which has Paul Maria. And then here we have our mug again with Paul Maria here. So showing you very much this kind of transposition between the different factories of the same motifs, the same kind of techniques, and which is what makes, I think, this collection so sort of interesting and so unusual. And I should say, I mean, I need to end now, I think, because I'll be on time, but I should say that if any of you find yourself in Oxford, if you'd like to sort of come and get in touch with me, I can probably certainly arrange for you to go and see the collection. The colleges are often very pleased and very happy to share their treasures with other people. It's just that you've got to know about them in the first place to know that they're there. But actually, once you do know, and once you've got the connection, they're usually very, very obliging and very only too happy to share and actually take great interest in their collection. So if any of you do find yourselves in Oxford and would like to come and see this collection, and also see the collections here in the Ashmolean Museum as well, please do get in touch, and I'd be very happy to try and arrange something for you. But on that note, I should probably stop, but I hope that was a good sort of introduction and overview of this extraordinary collection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. That was fascinating and a great introduction to some non-Wedgwood makers as well who were working during the period. So we do have a couple questions. Let me start with one by our own Woody Johnson, treasurer of the WIS. You mentioned, Matthew, that Richmond was the collector.
Yes.
Anything known about when and from whom he purchased the
No, that's the thing. No,
how he collected?
That's the thing, as I said, not yet. No, I've not been able to find very much out about him at all. So this is very much at the beginning, I think. So I mean, it would be a lovely research project for somebody to sort of really take forward, because he's an important collector. Clearly, he's collecting interesting things. But where he's doing that, He's clearly traveling around. And I said the family, the kind of shipping records show the family are regularly traveling between New York and Scotland. So clearly they're traveling around. He's described as an India merchant. His father was a muslin manufacturer in Glasgow, so they made quite a lot of money in kind of trade, and clearly were traveling around. So where he's acquiring these things, I suspect he's acquiring a lot of them maybe probably in Edinburgh, but as far as I'm aware, there are no records in the college. So it requires a bit more research and digging to really see if there's any paperwork, maybe up in Scotland, in Edinburgh, where there might be stuff telling us a bit more about where he was putting this collection together and where he's buying it from.
And about the Portland vase, is it in one of the numbered editions? Do you know anything about its provenance?
No, not again. Don't know that. So this again needs more work. It's described by them as a first edition. As far as I'm aware, there's no number on it. But again, this is something that needs to be double checked and needs to be to see if we can find out where it came from and more about it. But not as far as I'm aware. I've not got any record of the number. But that's not to say it might need another kind of search and another kind of close examination to see if we can find something on it.
Did the collection come with records or any kind of invoices or anything at all?
No, it didn't. So there's and the reason now, this is why it's quite hard to research, and there's a very cursory inventory of it with very, very little information about it. So it's actually almost nothing to go on. So I think, because it came in 1939, so way before the rest of the collection or anything like that, it just seems, I think it was probably given to just decorate the room. We've got this lovely neo-Georgian room. Oh, I think this Wedgwood would look very handsome there, and clearly. But what's interesting is that Raymond, as she became, did keep the rest of his father's collection. So, that was only dispersed towards the end of his life in the 1990s. So quite why Effie, as she was in 1939, decided to give the collection, just that aspect of the collection, just the Wedgwood, we'll never know for sure. But I think there's definitely more work to be done. There's definitely more work to see if we can find any more archival research. But certainly the librarian wasn't able to provide any more information than we had at the time. So I suspect the information is elsewhere. It may be up in Scotland. We'd have to do a bit more digging. But I said it would be a really nice research project for someone to do. It would be very nice, I think, to publish this collection fully and properly, to really get it out there so people are aware of it.
Was the rest of the collection that Raymond held on to, was it sold then? No,
it was dispersed. It was given through the art fund to various museums. So some of those ceramics that I told you about, they were all from Raymond's father's collection and are given in his father's name. It gets very confusing with the name changes yes. So clearly Raymond lived with them until just before he died, just before his 90th birthday, and then decided to disperse them to give them good homes. And so they are now in mainly Scottish collections, and they seem to be, but again, as far as I'm aware, they don't seem to come with any provenance but I need to do more work in that. I can contact my colleagues up in Scotland to see if when they were given some of these non-Wedgwood ceramics, the early porcelains, for example, if any other paperwork came with them to give us any indication of where these pieces were first acquired. But I suspect, he died in 1936. He's born in 1857, so it's a long time. They all lived to be long lives, so he could have been collecting quite a long time. But this sort of taste, this kind of Wedgwood taste, I tend to associate. I think probably that taste was formed maybe once they'd moved to Edinburgh in the kind of very nice neoclassical new town. This sort of neoclassical Wedgwood ware would work very well in those kind of in those Georgian townhouses in the Edinburgh new town.
Gotcha. We have a couple more questions, Matthew. Here's one. Does the scent bottle that you showed, the Turner, does it have the Turner mark and an impressed number along the edge?
I don't know. That number on the edge there is the museum number. So this is not in our collection. This is in the British. This is in the V&A. This collection. Sorry. I was just showing it for the sprig that shows the same sprig on the various collections. You know, she's showing how these sprigs were kind of used. The number you see is a painted number. So I don't know. You'd have to double check the V&A website to see what the. Unfortunately, the V&A doesn't always give full details of where things are marked. So we'd have to sort of probably contact the curator and sort of ask for more details on that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Another question. Due to the similarities of the various potteries, did they subcontract out to each other large orders? Wedgwood did that occasionally.
That's the big question. I mean, I'm not the expert, so I think the people who could answer that better than I can. I feel sure there must have been. And you know, I mean, how are these sprigs being copied? Are they just taking casts? Are they sharing molds? I mean, that's the question. You know, I don't know, and so I'm not sort of expert in this area, but certainly there must have been some degree of sharing. I mean, Stoke's not a big area, so there probably are sort of. I don't think it's just copying, but I think more. There are others who could answer that better than I can, I'm afraid.
I think you've answered all of the questions that we've got in the chat right now. Are there any other questions from anyone out there?
Actually, Anne, can I ask a question? It's just easier for me to ask it. I was wondering, since so many of the pieces are sharing the same depictions, I was just wondering if at the same time so many manufacturers were selling items that had similarities, at least in terms of look, to the casual collector, or if somebody just wanted something for decoration, they weren't a collector, they wanted to adorn their sitting room, would they have selected one manufacturer's piece over the other similar looking one based on price?
Or maybe. I mean, what I don't know is how the price compare between these things. I mean, I'm assuming some of the competitors were cheaper, but are they actually the Turner pieces? I mean, the quality is so high, I can't imagine they'd be cheaper than the Wedgwood pieces. But so I'm not sure about that. It would be good to look at the kind of comparative prices of those. I noticed one of the questions, one of you mentioned, I should have said that Effie was at Somerville College in the 1930s, in the early 1930s. I should have said that. Yes, she was when she was Effie. In the early 1930s.
Mm-hmm. Peggy, do you have a question?
I think you need to unmute Peggy. Oh, can she not unmute?
She can't unmute herself because we normally don't ask questions verbally. It was just me doing that. Sorry.
Yeah, we've got, you can put it in the chat, Peggy. We've got some more questions from Julie Hughes. Oh, hi, Julie. Do we know what connection Effie had to Somerville? Oh, sorry, you just answered.
Yes, I've answered that one. Yes, sorry.
Sorry
yes, I should have said yes. She was an alumna there, and yes, so she was there in the early 1930s.
Yeah, and here's a question, Matthew, for the Oxford Ceramics group. How can we get the newsletter? You've got a website. Can we sign up?
We have a website, and yeah, so do check our website, which is marvelous, and there are details. I mean, it's well worth you. I mean, I shouldn't be plugging this, but it's well worth. We're very joining to get the newsletter, and also we publish on the website lots of very interesting articles as well. So I mean, really quite important articles. So do check us out, because actually they do quite a lot. It's been going for about 20 years. And it's based here. We meet here at the museum, the Ashmolean Museum.
I put the link for that group in the chat.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Peggy, any question? I don't see a question.
I think you've been unmuted, Peggy, so I think you can speak now.
Oh, here we go. I've got a question.
Yeah.
When the WIS visited the Dudson factory, we were told that John Flaxman also designed reliefs for Dudson as well as for Wedgwood.
Yeah. Audrey Dudson actually had mentioned that to the group.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, of course, many, as we know, Wedgwood was using artists. They were all also independent artists, so they could design.
Right.
But actually, what you find, I think, for these other pieces is that they're exact copies. Some of these little sprigs, they are exactly the same. So, I mean, quite how Wedgwood reacted to them using these exact sort of versions, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Because actually some of them are.
And in fact, I actually have a Dudson plaster mold that was used for making the reliefs that is a Dancing Hours figure exactly the same as the Wedgwood ones.
I mean, presumably it's very easy to do. You can take a mold from a piece of from a piece, so it's actually not a difficult thing to take a kind of mold. I mean, I suppose you could compare the size of the sprigs, because if you take a mold from a fired piece, it will be slightly smaller in the final version to see if they've copied. So that's one way of seeing if they've been copying directly from finished pieces. One way of doing that. But we haven't done that yet, but we could do that. Certainly could do that with the collection here and have a play around.
Thank you, Matthew. That I think is the last question. So thank you so much. It was fantastic. Lots of kudos in the chat as well for a wonderful lecture. And we'll turn things back over to Lorraine.
Okay, thank you, Anne. So thank you everyone for joining us for today's lecture. Since our Zoom lectures began in February of 2020, it's been our great pleasure to bring these lectures to our WIS members and to many additional English ceramics groups and to the public at large for free. No charge. We've never done that. So we would be very appreciative if you would consider donating to the WIS Zoom lecture series so that we will be in a position to continue bringing these high-level educational programs to you. You can easily send a donation by going to the WIS website. You can donate using PayPal, you can donate using a credit card, but please remember to designate your donation to the WIS Zoom lectures. That would be quite helpful. I wish to thank Anne for being today's moderator, David for being our technical expert, Jeffrey for typing links into the chat box, and of course, Matthew for agreeing to speak again today and for delivering such an interesting and informative lecture. And I would just recommend that all of you stay tuned for the next WIS Zoom lecture. So have a good rest of the autumn and the rest of the year 2024. See you soon. Thank you so much. Bye now.